on to this. Research by the Gauteng City-Region Observatory has revealed the government has failed to proactively enforce the compliance of food outlets. This has also raised concerns about whether the government will, in the future, manage mandatory registration and mass inspection of food outlets. Joining us now is Mamokete Modiba, a researcher at the Gauteng City-Region Observatory. Mamokete, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. Now, you have penned an article together with a co-researcher just stating that the food poisoning crisis, the government's response isn't dealing with the real issues. Why is that so?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. So what the research is showing is that, the interventions that government has put forward are really a step in the right direction. But in terms of the context within which this crisis is occurring, the research that we've done at the Gauteng City-Region Observatory actually shows that those responses are only dealing with the crisis, the immediate crisis, but do not really go into the root causes of the crisis, which is, this crisis is mostly happening in low-income areas. So those would be your townships and your informal settlements. And we know that in those areas, there's a lot in terms of socioeconomic issues. So things like access to basic services would be a problem. So we think that with the responses that government has put forward, actually, they will not be dealing with the root causes, but they'll actually just be dealing with the symptoms. So maybe just to give an example, in terms of just a few of the interventions that government has put forward. So the first one would be the registration of businesses, these food handling outlets, including spaza shops. So one of the things is that when these businesses have to register with municipalities, there's a lot of documentation that they have to then produce in order to be registered with the municipality. One of those documents is a rezoning or zoning certificate that they have to actually produce in order to register, or building plans. But we know that in those contexts, as I've said, mostly in townships and informal settlements, there are not really any building plans. So those would be some of the barriers that stop these businesses from actually registering with their municipalities.
So, Mamokete, your organization does research work, and this is in partnership with the Gauteng Provincial Government, the University of Witwatersrand, as well as the University of Johannesburg, as well as SALGA in Gauteng. When the government tries to find solutions such as to this crisis, are there any synergies between yourselves as a research company that has done extensive research? One of your most latest surveys of 2023-24 has found that the access to refuse removal and satisfaction for service delivery has declined in Gauteng. And you just mentioned that there is a direct link between some of the communities, these low-income communities, where we are seeing a lot of the children who have passed away due to food poisoning. So do they refer to some of the research work that you guys do in order to be able to find solutions that are direct to the problem?
Yes, I think the GCRO was established especially for that reason, or specifically for that reason, so that we are a research institution that actually works hand in glove with government, and we actually make sure that the research that we do is not just research for the sake of research, but it's actually research that translates into policy impact. As the GCRO, we work at the interface of academia, so we do a lot of academic research, but that academic research then informs what happens in policy processes. So for instance, with this quality of life survey that we've recently done, this is one of the largest social surveys in South Africa, which is, we do it every 2 to 3 years since 2009. And we look at issues around, it's a multitude of issues, from the economy, from poverty, inequality. So we look at a whole lot of issues, including service delivery and how the perceptions of the people of Gauteng in terms of their satisfaction with those services that they get. So in conducting the survey, we then engage with government, whether provincial government or local municipalities, to share some of these insights that we get from the field with officials, so that they can then use the insights to inform the policy that they develop. So, with the recent quality of life, we have done a number of engagements with different government officials in different departments within Gauteng.
Right. So, I mean, you do mention that with what they are then proposing with the crisis, it's only what will help in the near future, and it overlooks the underlying structural factors. What were your recommendations with regards to ensuring that this long-term crisis is looked into and resolved for quite some time?
I think one of the main recommendations, or not even recommendations, but just some of the things that government should look into in terms of finding sustainable solutions that will be long-term as opposed to just responding to the crisis, is that, I mean, with the quality of life, one of the things that we discovered or found out is that 57% of businesses in Gauteng are unregistered. So they don't have CIPC certificate or registrations. They are not registered with tax, with SARS, et cetera, et cetera. So I think those kinds of issues need to be factored in when certain responses are developed or put forward. For instance, I mean, we know the president also spoke about this establishment of a fund that is meant to support township and rural businesses, to specifically deal with issues around compliance, to make sure that they adhere to the health and safety standards, right? But when you look at the criteria for accessing that fund, which is meant to support these businesses that are mostly in townships and informal settlements, the criteria is quite exclusionary. For instance, in order to access the fund, you have to be registered with CIPC. You have to have a tax clearance certificate. And already with that, you're excluding a whole lot of businesses. But we know that the context within which we are trying to solve this issue, a number of those businesses are unregistered. So we need to be coming up with solutions that respond to what is happening in those contexts.
All right, Mamokete, thank you so much for just giving us clarity and more insight within that research that has been conducted. Thank you so much for your time this evening. That was Mamokete Modiba, researcher at the Gauteng City-Region Observatory.